Morning, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 6. In Chapter 5, we looked at the process consumers use when buying stuff, and in Chapter 6, we looked at the process organizations use when they buy products. So the good news with this chapter is we're back to our regular screen size on the monitor. That's the good news. The bad news is today it's 95 degrees in my office, and I may melt before this class is over. But anyways, it's a little bit warm here. Okay, so off we go to Chapter 6. So in Chapter 6, we look at sort of the nature of organizational markets. So we look at the different types of buyers in the organizational market. We have industrial buyers, we have resellers, otherwise known as wholesalers and retailers. And then we also have a government market, which is actually quite large. And then we look at features of organizational buying that make it different than consumer buying. And we look at how organizational purchasing is affected by the use of buying centers and these buying situations. And then finally we look at the importance and nature of online buying in the organizational market. When we talk about the organizational market, sometimes we use a little acronym here, the B2B market, as opposed to the B2C market. B2C is businesses selling to consumers, and B2B is businesses selling to businesses, otherwise known as the organizational market. And what we're going to see is that more products are purchased and sold online in the B2B market than in the B2C market. Okay, so off we go. Okay, so by business marketing, we mean the B2B market, business to business market, and the organizational market, the industrial market, the business market is comprised of made up of marketing products to companies and governments or government agencies. And the organizational buying market are the parties that buy products and resell them to others, they buy products and resell them to others, like a retailer, or they buy products and then process them and then resell them to others. So that's one supplier selling to a manufacturer. And then there's a component of products that get purchased and used internally. So when a factory buys electricity, it uses the electricity internally for its own operations and doesn't resell that electricity. So another way of looking at the organizational market is looking at who it's comprised of. So it's manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, and then government and government-related agencies. And the other way of defining the organizational market is it's all the buyers in a country except for households, or all the buyers in a country except for the final consumer. So there's different ways we can define the organizational market. Oops. Okay, so now we have our three classes of buyers in the organizational market. So we have industrial. So we have the industrial sector. So it's industrial firms. Industrial firms buy products and then transform them prior to reselling the product to the next buyer. And as the book mentions, there's about 40,000 manufacturers in Canada. Over the last century, the nature of the economy in developed countries has been evolving. And in the last century, our economy shifted primarily from a manufacturing base to a service base. And that evolution follows the previous big evolution in our economy from agricultural to manufacturing and resource extraction, which happened a century before. Okay, then in the reseller market, these are wholesalers and retailers, so they buy products and then they resell them without performing any processing. And the book tells us that there's about 200,000 retailers in Canada and about 65,000 wholesalers. And then the final segment of the organizational market is the government market. So this is federal government, provincial government, and municipal governments. And it includes the government and its agencies. And these markets are fairly large. So I have some stats here to show you. They're fairly large. Oh, okay, so here we have the Government of Canada. So the Government of Canada buys approximately $16 billion worth of products every year on behalf of the various federal government departments and agencies. And the province of Alberta purchases approximately, the figure here, it's about $4.8 billion per year. That adds up to about $4.8 billion. So they're buying tangible goods, they're buying services, they're buying construction materials, they're buying new hospitals, they're buying new schools, they're buying new roadways, highways. That adds up to about $4.8 billion per year. So, I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. And then we have another way of looking at the size of the government organizational sector is these figures combine all levels of government in Canada, plus the so-called MASH subsector, and the MASH stands for municipal, academic, school boards, and hospitals. And they purchase approximately $100 billion worth of products per year in Canada. So that's not a market to ignore. And then final figure I have to show you comes from Europe. In the European Union, I mean, there's 28 countries in the European Union, and the government sector in the European Union, they buy approximately $3.3 trillion worth of products per year. But of course, you know, there's over 500,000 people in the European Union, so obviously there's lots of governments there. There's state governments and or national governments and provincial and state level governments and municipal governments, and there's a lot of people there. Anyway, so 3.3 trillion, it's obviously a very large number. Okay, so back we go to slides. Okay, and then in addition to having an organizational market within our national boundaries, there's also obviously an organizational market internationally, because companies can sell to organizations both within its own country and overseas. And the book mentions a few examples of companies that sell in the organizational market. So, you know, in Alberta here we produce oil and gas. A lot of the oil in Alberta gets sent down to the Gulf of Mexico for refining. So the oil producers are selling to refineries. So the refineries in the United States are international organizational market buyers. And then we have paper companies, Abitibi Price and Pratt and Whitney, the airplane engine manufacturer. Anyways, there's no end of international markets for in the organizational side of things, industrial market. It is hot in here. Okay. Oops. Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry. Okay. So in 1994, Canada, the United States, and Mexico entered into a three-way free trade agreement. Before that, there was a free trade agreement between Canada and the United States, but in 1994, Mexico kind of came into the fold. And the three countries adopted a system for classifying economic output. And the system is called NAICS, stands for North American Industry Classification System. And it's a 6-digit code that we can use to classify economic output. So if we're a Canadian company and we want to export into the United States or Mexico, when we gather industry data, we know that it'll be comparable to the data that we use in Canada. So the NAICS system is comprised of 20 sectors, 103 subsectors, 328 industry groups, 28 industries, and 928 national industries. So I have a slide here which kind of explains how the system works. There's an example in the book as well. But I have another slide. Okay, so the NAICS North American Industry Classification System is comprised of 20 sectors. So these are the 20 sectors: agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting. That's 1. Mining is 2. Utilities is 3. Construction is 4. Manufacturing, wholesale trade, retail trade, transportation, information, finance, and insurance. Number 11 is real estate. Number 12, professional, scientific, and technical services. Management, administration of waste management and remedial services. Education, healthcare, social assistance, arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, food, other, and then public administration. These are the 20 sectors. And then in addition to the NAICS system, which classifies who produces products, there's also another system called, I don't know how to pronounce it, NAPCS, NAPS, or something like that. And NAPCS is another classification system. Oops, actually before I get there, oops. So we have 20 sectors. We have 20 sectors in NAICS. So first sector is agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. That's all one sector. And then we have subsectors. And I have an example. So a subsector example here is agriculture. So we can dig up data about soybean farming, oilseed farming other than soybean, dry pea and bean farming, wheat farming, corn farming, rice farming, oilseed, potatoes, oranges, apples, grapes. And then some other examples of subsectors within the 20 sectors. So we have mining, so we have crude petroleum and natural gas extraction, natural gas liquid extraction, bituminous coal and lignite surface mining, bituminous coal underground mining, anthracite coal, iron ore mining, gold mining, silver mining, lead, zinc mining, copper, nickel, uranium, quarrying, and so on. Okay, and so on. And then I have a couple more sectors here just to look at. So it's second sector. So another sector is the finance and insurance, so monetary authorities. All central banks have their own category. Commercial banking, saving institutions, credit unions, credit card issuance, sales funding, consumer lending, real estate lending, and I think I have one final one here. Oops, the wrong way. No, I don't, sorry. Okay, so those are subsectors of the 20 NAICS sectors. And then we also have this other code, another 6-digit code that's shared between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And it's used for classifying products and how they're used as opposed to who produces them. So the objective of NAPCS, so it's a North American Product Classification System. It's a demand-oriented product classification system, so it's based on how things are used rather than who produces them. The NAPCS system is not completely finalized, so it's going to group products according to how they're used and used in relationship to each other. Anyways, so it's part of the NAFTA agreement. Okay, so how do we read one of these NAICS codes? Well, I have an example here. There's one in the book as well, but I have another one. Okay, so the NAICS code is a 6-digit code, and the first two digits on the left-hand side represent the industry. The first 3 digits on the left-hand side represent the industry sector. The first 3 digits on the left-hand side represent the industry subsector. Then we have first 4 digits on the left is industry group. First 5 digits on the left is industry, and then the full 6-digit code is the national industry. Is the national industry. So there's another code indicating which country the industry is in. Okay, so let's just move on. Oops, better go back to here. And then there's that example in the book that shows exactly the same thing. Oops, oh geez, I didn't show you my example. Oh geez, I actually have an example. It's hot in here, that's my problem. So here's my example. This is an American example. Oops, it's an American example, but what the heck. So here we have apple orchards. So the sector is 11. That's agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, and fishing. Industry subsector is crop production. Industry group, fruit, tree, and nut farming. So fruits. Industry, first 5 digits to the left, so it's non-citrus fruit and nut tree farming. And then final NAICS code is for apple orchard, so it's 111 33-1. Okay, so it's an example of a NAICS code and how to read the code. Okay. Oops. Okay. Okay, so characteristics of organizational buying that distinguish it from consumer buying. So we know that organizational buyers buy products for resale, if they're wholesalers or retailers, or they buy products for further processing before resale, and that's the industrial market. And then, of course, we have some government buyers in there as well. So the organizational buying process is the decision-making process used by organizations for identifying, evaluating, and choosing between products and suppliers. So we have 4 characteristics of the organizational buying market. We have market characteristics, we have product characteristics, we have buying process characteristics, and then we have the marketing mix characteristics. So the marketing mix are the 4 Ps that we look at in chapters 10 through 18. So when we look at the market characteristics, on the little slide here, that really represents these guys. So these are all market characteristics. I can spell, I just can't write neatly. So market characteristics, what do we know? We know that the demand for products purchased by organizations, purchased by industry, is a so-called derived demand, which means that the demand that the organizational buyer has for a product is ultimately determined or ultimately derived from consumer demand at the end of the processing chain. So that differs from consumer buying. With consumer buying, the consumer or the household buys the product, and that's the end of the life of the product for the most part. But with the organizational buying, they buy products as a means to an end. rather than as an end in itself. Okay, then another distinguishing characteristic, market characteristic in the organizational buying market is that orders tend to be fairly large in size than with consumer buying, and companies use a more formal process in purchasing. They use formal policies and procedures as opposed to in the consumer market. So I have an example of a large order size here. So recently, Air Canada went out and bought some new, they entered into a new order for jets. And they agreed to buy, this is a couple years back, but it doesn't matter. They agreed to buy 61 jets from the airplane manufacturer of Boeing down in the States. And the value of the deal is $6.5 billion. And it's going to take 4 years to deliver these jets because Boeing doesn't have them in inventory. It has to manufacture them. Anyway, so here's an example of a large industrial order: 61 jets for $6.5 billion, with delivery taking place over 4 years, and delivery is deferred by 3 years. I think Boeing has a back order of planes, so they can't just produce them right away. Okay. And so we can just surmise the fact that here's one company, Air Canada, buying $6.5 billion worth of planes in one order. We can just figure out that we can just know intuitively that they use a fairly sophisticated buying process. Okay, then another distinguishing characteristic of the organizational buying market is that they have relatively few buyers. So, for example, in Canada, the population of Canada is about 36 million residents. And if we compare 36 million potential buyers in Canada, I guess we should factor in little kids, but whatever. In the industrial market in Canada, we have 40,000 manufacturers, we have 200,000 retailers, and we have 65,000 wholesalers. So all that adds up to about 305,000 in the industrial market. And then, of course, we have some on the government side as well. So how many government bodies can there be across Canada? If we took every little municipality into consideration, maybe there's about 45,000. So in the industrial market in Canada, I'm guessing there's probably about 350,000 buyers versus 36 million buyers for the country as a whole. And maybe that's really only about 30 million when you factor out little kids, but whatever. So we can see that there's quite a difference in the number of potential buyers. Okay, so we have 4 characteristics of organizational buying. We have market characteristics. We also have product characteristics. So when we talk about product characteristics, we have a number of identifiable features here. So as I mentioned before, when organizational buyers they buy products to fulfill some other objective, such as lowering their costs or to increase revenues. So they're really buying products as a means to an end, versus in the consumer market, households buy products as an end in itself, because the product usually doesn't go any further. And in the organizational market, products tend to be more technically defined than in the consumer market, and often when products in the industrial market are purchased, they're either in raw material form or in semi-processed form. So you're an automotive manufacturer and you buy some pre-built frames for your car, and then maybe once the frames for the car come in, you still have to do some minor modifications to them before you start assembling them. Okay, and often the buying characteristics for industrial buyers are based not only on the product features, but also on supplier capabilities. And some of the common criteria used by organizational buyers, in addition to price, are the product specifications, the delivery schedule, technical capabilities of the vendor, the presence or absence of warranties, the past performance of the vendor, and the production capabilities of the vendor. And then if the organizational buyer is buying products from outside the country, then the buyer might use ISO 9000 certification as a buying criteria. ISO 9000 is a manufacturing process quality standard. It's a manufacturing process quality standard. It is not a product quality standard. It's a manufacturing process quality standard. But if you're buying, if you're an organizational buyer buying something from overseas and you're not so familiar with the vendor, then you might rely upon this third-party certification to help ensure that you're buying products of acceptable quality. Okay, and then finally, if you're an organizational buyer, you might also engage in so-called supplier development. So the buyer wants to help improve the manufacturing capability of the vendor. So the buyer might help the selling organization improve their quality standards, improve their efficiency, help reduce their costs, because sometimes, or often in the organizational market, the contracts are long-term in nature, and the buyer has a vested interest in the success of the vendor. Okay. So the next feature of the organizational buying process, we have four distinguishing characteristics of the organizational buying process. We have market characteristics, we have product characteristics, we have buying process characteristics, and then we also have the marketing mix characteristics. We don't cover the marketing mix characteristics in this chapter, but the third one is the buying process characteristics. So in the buying process used by organizational buyers, the buyers often have technical qualifications, and they follow formal policy and procedures, and the buying objectives and criteria are formally specified. And often in the buying process by an organization, there are multiple parties involved in the exercise, and we're going to see that in just a minute through the use of these buying centers or buying groups, where there's really a committee in charge of the purchase decision process. And the relationship between buyers and sellers in the organizational side is usually more complicated. It's more complex than it is in the consumer side. And so the price is often negotiated between the buyer and seller, as opposed to the consumer side. Often when you buy stuff in the consumer market, I go to the gas station, the gas is 90 cents a liter, I just pay the price, I don't start haggling with the fellow. Or when you're going to buy milk and bread, you don't negotiate the price, you just accept the fixed price. But in the organizational market, often there's more negotiation on price, there's negotiation on technical specifications, negotiation on the delivery schedule, what the terms of the warranty are, if there is one, and often the agreement is long-term in nature. You're buying something over a several-year period, just like the example from Air Canada. From purchase to final delivery, there's a 7-year period there. They entered into the agreement in 2013. Delivery started in 2017, and deliveries finished in 2021. So it's a total of a 7-year period, which is different than when you go to buy gas for your car. It's only good for the next few days or in the next week. Okay, likewise, so another feature of the relationship that can be more complicated than in the consumer side is that there can be sometimes the presence of so-called reciprocity. So this is where each party to the transaction agrees to both sell some products to the other party and to also buy some products back from the other party. Um, and so we don't usually see that in the consumer market. I buy gas from the gas station. I don't sell them anything, I just buy gas. But in the industrial market, sometimes we have a presence of reciprocity. And then sometimes we also have these supply partnerships where the vendor and the buyer agree on some common objectives and they agree on some common policies and procedures to help reduce the costs in the purchase process. Okay, and as we mentioned before, in organizational buying, there's often a group of people involved in the purchase decision. And the book calls it a buying center, but really all it is, it's a committee. It's a committee of people involved in the buying in decisions. And there's often a committee involved when contracts are long-term in nature. So again, coming back to Air Canada, no doubt about it, there's no single person who made this decision to buy these 61 aircraft from Boeing. Air Canada obviously used a committee of some sort. You had finance people, you had maintenance people, you had marketing people. You had all sorts of people involved in that kind of decision. Okay, so the committee, this buying center, it can either be formal in nature or informal. So if you're getting involved in a long-term, very expensive purchase process, it's probably going to be a formal group. But if it's just buying something routine, then it's probably going to be an informal buying group. And if the buyer uses a buying center, then the vendor needs to understand who the people are who comprise the buying center, what their relative influence is, what the purchase criteria each uses, and how each person in the buying center views the vendor, because you're trying to understand how the decision is ultimately going to be arrived at. And then back in chapter 5, when we looked at families buying a product, we saw that sometimes members of families have various roles in the buying process. So likewise, in the organizational buying, if there's a buying center, then the different members of the committee can have different roles. We can have actual users, so people actually use the product. So we can imagine when Air Canada was going out buying these 61 aircraft, they probably consulted with the pilots, people that actually have to fly these things. So they consult with the actual users. They often have influencers. These are people who influence the decision-making process. You actually have the buyers. These are the people that have the formal authority to select the buyer and negotiate contract terms. You have deciders who have the authority to approve suppliers. You have so-called gatekeepers, so people controlling the information in and out of the buying center. And I made a little chart here that compares the roles of these different buyers in organizational buying versus family buying, which is kind of the consumer market. But we have pretty well the same types of roles in the consumer market. Remember, in the family example on page 141 of the book, we had some information gatherers, we had influencers, we had decision maker, we had the purchaser, we had the actual user. And in the organizational market, well, we have the same influencer, we have decision makers, we have buyers, we have users, and then we also have gatekeepers trying to keep control of the information. Not quite the same as information gatherer, but I guess it's information controller. Okay, so just looking at these buying centers a little bit more. Whoops. Okay, so in large companies, in recent years, there has been growing consumer concern about the effect that industrial buyers have on the environment and on the communities that the large buyers interact with. And so organizational buyers, especially large organizational buyers, often factor into their buying decisions the effect that their purchasing has on both the environment and social consequences of the economic activity of the organizational buyer. So I have some examples here to show you this. There are many examples of this interest in, I guess the book calls it sustainable procurement, so sustainable purchasing. So there's many examples of this, and the examples I have come from, well, one's a European company and one is an American company, but they both operate internationally. Oops. Oh, okay. So my first example here is from Nestle. So we all know Nestle. I think it's based in Switzerland, actually. Nestle, it's the chocolate milk people. You know, powdered chocolate milk people. Nestle is a big company. Nestle has sales of about $100 billion per year. That's U.S. $100 billion per year, and they have about 340,000 employees. So it's a very large company, a relatively large company. So Nestle is one of these leaders in sustainable procurement, sustainable development, and so they set targets for themselves, addressing various aspects of the environment that they operate in. So what does Nestle commit to do with respect to nutrition? Just a second here. There's so much stuff here. So they commit to providing nutritionally sound products for children. They also commit to reducing the risk of undernutrition through micronutrient fortification. They also commit to reducing salt in their products. They're committing to reducing sugars in our product because they're concerned by the interests of their stakeholders. In this case, their stakeholder is the consumer. And we know that our diets tend to have too much salt in them, too much sugar in them, and so Nestle is committing to trying to improve the health of the customers for their products. Okay, so they've also committed to reducing saturated fats and removing trans fats from their products. They're also encouraging the consumption of whole grains and vegetables, committing to delivering nutritional information and advice, committed to providing advice for consumers regarding portion size, committed to providing advice regarding healthy diets, lifestyles, including physical activity. So they're doing things, they're committing to some practices to help improve the health of their consumers. So this is part of sustainable development. And so likewise, Nestle makes some commitments to improving the rural economies where they buy materials around the world. So they're committed to responsible sourcing throughout their supply chain. I don't know what this is, rolling out the Nestle Cocoa Plan with cocoa farmers and rolling out the Nescafe Plan with coffee farmers. Anyways, I'm guessing what this is. It's trying to ensure that cocoa farmers around the world and coffee farmers around the world that Nestle buys from are committed to sustainable economic development and sustainable environmental development. Okay, so Nestle also commits to a couple of other things as well. Okay, so Nestle is involved in food products, and so a lot of their food products are grown by farmers, coffee and chocolate and whatnot. So Nestle also is committing to advocating for effective water policies and stewardship. They're committed to treating water that they discharge, effectively treating the water they discharge. raising awareness regarding water conservation and improving access to water and sanitation across their value chain, across their where they're buying materials from. They're committing to sustainable development, so improving the environmental performance of our packaging, assessing and optimizing the environmental impact of our products, providing climate change leadership, preserving natural capital, which includes forests. So instead of just pillaging, mowing down jungles to plant monocrops like coffee and I don't know where chocolate comes from. They're going to work with the environment in a sustainable manner, and likewise, they're also concerned about. They're making commitments to improving human rights around the world. So they're committed to eliminating child labor in key commodities. They're committed to working against corruption and bribery. They're committed to ensuring their employees have basic safety and health protection. They're committed to ensuring their operations have gender balance, male and female. So Nestle is an example of a company engaged in sustainable procurement. And I have one more example. Nestle's I believe it's a Swiss company. One more example is an American company that you're probably all familiar with. It's the American cosmetics company Avon. And Avon is, I believe it must be based in California, because California has a piece of legislation called Transparency in Supply Chains Act. And the legislation forces large companies to disclose the labor practices throughout its supply chain. And so this California Transparency in Labor Chains Act requires companies to disclose and eradicate use of forced labor and human trafficking. So Avon buys products from 40 countries around the world, and those products end up in cosmetics, fragrances, toiletries, and Avon commits to forbidding the use of child labor, which means they will not use forced labor, prison labor, bonded labor, which really means slavery, indentured labor, or otherwise engage in the sport of trafficking in human beings. So a little bit different than, so I'm guessing that Avon does not buy a lot of products from Bolivia, because we know that in Bolivia, child labor is part of the culture down there. Anyways, moving on. Oops. Okay. Okay, so the book talks about these three classes of organizational buying situations, three buying situations. We have when organizational buyers buy a product, they can be buying a product that they've never purchased before. They can be buying a product that they have purchased many times before, so a rebuy. And then sometimes it buys a product that is similar to what it's purchased before, but there may be some modifications to the product. And that buying situation is called a modified rebuy. And so the buying center adapts itself to these three different buying situations with a so-called new buy. There's lots of risk involved in the decision. So there's lots of parties involved. There's many people involved. It's a long decision-making process. Okay, so there's risk involved, so there's many people involved, and it's a long decision-making process. And then in a straight rebuy, it's a low risk purchasing transaction, and so there's fewer people involved in the decision-making process because the big group was involved in the past, and the buyer probably makes use of a list of pre-approved suppliers. So they just need to go to the list of pre-approved suppliers and pick one from the list. And then in a modified rebuy, so they're buying a product that's similar to what they purchased in the past, but there's some new features. So the process is more similar to a straight rebuy than to a new buy. So there's relatively few people involved, and the time process is relatively short compared to the new buy situation. Okay. Oops. Okay, so in chapter 5, we looked at the 5-step purchase decision process that consumers use: problem recognition, information search, or search for solutions to the problem, evaluation of alternatives, purchase decision, and then post purchase behavior. And so the same 5 stages in the buying process are used in the organizational side as on the consumer side, but the organizational process just happens to be more formal than on the consumer side. So we can read this distinction between the, or we can see how these 5 different stages are slightly different in the consumer market than in the organizational market by going through that. And then the book contains an example of a industrial buyer going through this 5-step process. And so we can see that it's a more formal process than used in the consumer market. Oops. Okay, and the example is a company that manufactures machine vision systems. And so this is an example in the book of a company walking through this 5-step process. So the buyer is a company that manufactures machine vision systems and then sells them to other companies. And so at the problem recognition stage, so in this example, the buyer buys the parts for this machine visioning system. It assembles the parts and then sells the finished product, or sells the machine visioning system to other industrial buyers. So the first stage is the problem recognition stage, and the buyer in this case has to decide whether to buy the parts that it needs for this machine visioning system, or whether it should make the parts in-house or not. So there's a make-buy decision. And then in the second step, this information search stage, so they're searching for solutions to the problem. The problem is where do we get these component parts that we need for our machine visioning system. So in the example in the book, the buyer has an in-house database of products and suppliers, and all the products in this database have been pre-negotiated regarding price, quality, and delivery time amongst the various suppliers. And they may have used a so-called value analysis to assess products going into their catalog, into their system. So value analysis is a systematic evaluation of product in terms of product's design, its quality, and performance. And then another component of the information search stage is the company's in-house engineers will stay on top of developments in the technology, so they can answer some of their own questions from in-house sources. Okay, so the third stage in the buying process used by an organizational buyer is evaluating these different products. And so the company will evaluate the product in terms of the product performance, in terms of the technical support provided by the vendor, how easy the product is to use, and then finally, although they certainly assess the product on the basis of price, price is not the top criteria that gets used in the decision-making process. And the buyer will often come up with a short list of potential bidders, 2 or 3 companies, and then invite the different bidders to reply, within a certain period of time. And then finally, the buyer makes a decision from a short list, and the decision process again takes more time than it does on the consumer side. It could take several weeks to several months. It may be that the buyer has to go to the potential supplier and engage in further negotiations regarding price or product performance or delivery times. And then in the final stage, just as we see in the consumer side, there's a post-purchase behavior stage where the buyer will evaluate, will formally review the products in a product acceptance process, and then it'll monitor and record supplier process. So if they are going to buy similar products again down the road, they'll know whether or not to keep that vendor on their shortlist or not. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the last little section of this chapter deals with the role of internet purchasing in the organizational market, and the book talks about the large size of online buying in the organizational market. So I have a slide here that kind of gives us an idea on the magnitude of online buying in the organizational market, or otherwise known as the B2B market. Oh, there we go. So here's a forecast by some consultant that's forecasting that by the year 2020, the value of the business-to-business market conducted online will be nearly $7 trillion. And these analysts estimate that the value of these transactions are about twice the size of the business-to-consumer market transactions online. So B2B online commerce is much greater than the value of B2C online commerce. We're all familiar with B2C online commerce. You know, you buy something from Sears over the internet, or you buy something from Amazon or Canadian Tire. But we buy stuff from those companies because we're consumers. But businesses, the value of online transactions just between businesses is much greater than it is between businesses and consumers. But we often don't know that because if we don't work in the industrial side, we might not be aware of the prevalence of online transactions in the B2B world. Okay, so the question is why is the value of online transactions so much higher in the B2B world than in the B2C world? And the answer is organizational buyers tend to be heavy consumers of information during the purchase process. And if we're heavy consumers of information, that means we're checking out websites, and we're probably doing more online transactions than at bricks and mortar stores. And then likewise, organizational buyers use the internet to reduce purchasing costs. So if you can just place a purchase order over the internet, then you're saving on postage, you're saving on administration. So you just read your order, you send your order over the internet to the vendor, just the same way we do in the business to consumer side. And then likewise, organizational buyers also use the internet to reduce their marketing costs. So instead of putting ads in magazines and radio and TV, the organizational buyers send their ads through the internet, or they focus their marketing activities over the internet rather than through other forms of advertising and communication. Okay, then the book talks about two different types of auctions that can be used in organizational markets. Let's just see it here. Oh, the first one they call traditional auction, they call a reverse auction. So in a traditional auction, like the normal name for this, you may not know that there is a name for it. The normal name for a traditional auction is an English auction. There's probably a dozen different types of auction formats, And the one that we're most familiar with is the English auction. Just a sec here. Is the English style auction. So it's English auction. And in an English style auction, as we know, a vendor puts a product out for sale, and there are many potential purchasers that bid on the product, and they bid the price up, and the high price wins. So just as the little diagram shows here, one vendor, one product, many different buyers. As more and more people participate in the auction, they compete against each other, and it drives the price up. High price wins. And then, so a good example of an English auction in the B2B field is eBay. eBay sells stuff not only in the consumer market, but they also sell stuff in the organizational market as well. And so eBay's auctions are English auction format. And then there's another type of auction known as a reverse auction. And what we have is we have one buyer, and the buyer lets known what it wants to buy, and you have many vendors. And the many vendors bid on the order, and so as you have more and more vendors competing to sell to this buyer, price goes down, and low price wins. Low price wins. The book, I don't think the book gives us any examples of companies. I mean, we're not so familiar with who these companies are because we just don't encounter them in regular life. But certainly, there's many industries out there that do use reverse auctions. And just an advertisement for second year. Any students that are interested in going into the management diploma program in second year, there's a whole course on e-commerce. And this e-commerce course goes into these different types of auctions in more detail. Anyways, that's it for chapter 6 here, the organizational buying market. And we'll see you back in chapter 7.